The Washington Commanders have officially been eliminated from the playoffs, so we're going to examine how we got here, what big decisions are coming, and why Commanders fans should have some hope today on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast.
You are Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes, your daily podcast for NFL and college football scouting. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's better than this? It's guys being dudes here on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast. We're the Draft Dudes. I'm Joe Marino from Locked On Bills. He's Kyle Crabbs from Locked On Dolphins. And we are your NFL experts here with you daily to talk team building across the league on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with the Draft Dudes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On NFL Scouting your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, we appreciate y'all being here very, very much.
Joe, Merry Christmas to you. With a
Merry
full
Christmas.
disclosure, as a follow-through of the bit from Friday when we wanted to wish Merry Christmas, and then it's like, oh, wait, we're doing a show on Christmas. But full disclosure, we are not recording on Christmas. As a matter of fact, we are not even recording before Washington's Week 6 or after Washington's Week 16 game. We're recording on Friday afternoon. So, if anything crazy happens when Washington plays, please know they were on our list because they were eliminated in Week 15, and we only have so many shows to be able to fill out. And we wanted to prioritize getting this team up now. And we were recording before the next game that they play, which isn't really relevant because for our purposes, they've already been eliminated from the playoffs already. All said and done.
And our full Week 16 reaction podcast comes tomorrow. There's 3 games, if I'm not mistaken, on Christmas. So we'll take an entire look at what happened in Week 16 on tomorrow's discussion. But today,
that's right,
we take command and talk about the Washington Commanders. We've been doing this for all the teams that have been eliminated from the playoffs, where we're going to talk about what happened, how do we get here. Then we're going to take a look at the big decisions that they have to make. And then, of course, we end with the Levy Grail, which is where all the optimism comes together. And so starting with how we got here, Kyle, I go to where I want to start this conversation is that I feel like personnel management has been an issue. This is a deficient roster when it comes to the talent available. And I think they had a dreadful offseason. Needed a quarterback. You rolled with Sam Howell. And I think Sam Howell's done some good this year, but that was a gamble that you took, and you put a lot on his plate. That's one of my biggest criticisms for Washington. I watched him play a lot this year, and everything was challenging for Sam Howell. They got into true drop-back passing all the time. Like, they never stayed committed to the run game, even when it was effective. And it's not like they have a high play action rate. It's not like they run a lot of screen. This is pure drop-back passing for a quarterback that played college football for Phil Longo in a Mickey Mouse offense, right? It was a huge jump for him. And then I think they just did, like, you needed offensive line. What did you do on the offensive line? You signed Nick Gates and Andrew Wiley? Those were your big offensive line moves? You need help on defense? You drafted Emmanuel Forbes in the first round, Quan Martin in the second round? Ricky Stromberg. You got nothing. Your draft class did nothing productive for your football team this past year. You need help. You need a linebacker. We've been talking about linebackers in Washington for 100 years now. It was Cody Barton. That was your answer? This team had a dreadful offseason. We ranked this as one of the lowest, least talented rosters in the NFL going into the season. So color us unsurprised that they had the season that they had.
I think that's where it starts for me is our expectations were not high for Washington. And obviously they went, 8-1 last year. Mm-hmm. So there's some expectation in that regard. But when you make a transition and you put your eggs in an inexperienced quarterback and all of the things that you just said, I think the writing kind of was on the wall here for what this season was probably going to look like. And sure enough, that's what you end up getting with Washington, particularly in the NFC East, where you have divisional opponents in Philadelphia and Dallas that are playing very good football. And then you have to play the AFC East, which has the Buffalo Bills, who beat you by 34 points. It has the Miami Dolphins that beat you by 35 points. This was not an easy schedule to draw on top of your own concerns and limitations and inexperiences. And you have a coordinator change, and then you fire your defensive coordinator throughout the course of the season. And I think what's really eye-opening to me, Joe, is there's teams that have incurred major personnel injuries throughout the course of the season that have changed the landscape of the roster. I would ask you, what injuries have Washington endured this season that has radically changed the outlook of the team? None, right?
Yeah, there's nothing I can point to.
That's the most damning thing about it, is it's like, well, you can't sit here and say, oh, well, we lost Kirk Cousins to a torn Achilles and are still fighting our way around 500. Or, oh, we lost, who's another example of it, like a crushing blow that a team suffered, right? Like
Joe Burrow.
Joe Burrow. And lo and behold, the Bengals sitting at 8-6 right now as we record this on December 22nd. So things like that, I think, are where when we get to the Levy Grail, I think you're going to look at where this team is at. And I think the conversation's pretty easy about why there's optimism because of what has changed this year. And it starts at the very top of the organization. And some of those decisions that are going to be made, you're not going to be tied to anything because you have new ownership that's just come in. But it felt like the perfect embodiment of Dan Snyder's last year of owning the football team, because it was all of the issues that Dan Snyder has perpetuated just from a football operations standpoint, never mind the business side of owning an NFL franchise. It's all kind of perpetuated throughout the course of this season, and this is the product that you got.
I think it's also worth mentioning just this coaching staff, particularly on the defensive side of the football. Ron Rivera, Jack Del Rio. I think they're cooked, man. I think the game's kind of passed them by. This is the worst defense in the NFL, and it's not because of lack of investments. We know the first round picks that are all over that roster and high priced acquisitions as well, like guys you've retained, some guys that you've paid, and like, dude, just dreadful on defense. Meanwhile, Sam Howell's getting sacked on 10% of his dropbacks. You got problems here. And I think a lot of the things that we're concerned with, they manifested themselves. And, you know, we obviously just buried the Commanders here, and that's what we do in the first segment. And, you know, it gets a lot more interesting for Commanders fans probably the rest of the way, where we start to get into the decisions. We're going to talk about why there's reasons to be hopeful. And, I mean, obviously everybody knows you don't have Daniel Snyder anymore. That's going to be at the forefront of that. But there's a lot more to get to. But I think they made a miscalculation going into this year of what they had. And, you know, we're not surprised at the result to this point. But another offseason is coming, and there's reasons to be hopeful. We're going to get into all of that here in just a moment. So be sure to stick with us.
Okay, Joseph. So we've talked about what went wrong and where the issues lie pretty extensively. My next question is, where do you start? You probably start with the first decision that you have to make, right? Would you think that's probably an appropriate place, which is a head coach?
Yeah, and GM.
And GM. So if I'm the new ownership group here in Washington, and they have ownership experience with the 76ers, Josh Harris, one of the basketball teams, is it the Wizards that they, or no, the baseball teams, right? They own one of the baseball teams too. Is it the Nationals?
Dude, I don't know. This is a rich man that bought. I don't know.
All right. They have experience with owning franchises, and you know, I think the first thing that any owner of a franchise, if you have experience doing it, understands is you have to get you have to know what you know and get out of the way with what you don't, right? And I think that's where, if I'm Josh Harris and this ownership group, is a really good opportunity, and I would want a coach with experience to help set the foundation of a new culture within the Commanders organization. Now, whether that means you get a coach that wants personnel decision-making on top of it, that's negotiable. But at the end of the day, I want experience in both my head coach and my front office executive spots if I'm the ownership group, because this ownership group has experience and understands how to run an organization in the sports realm.
Yeah, the New Jersey Devils and the Philadelphia 76ers are the two other teams
Jersey
that he
Devils.
has.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So you were onto something there. I was like, well, when you said 76ers, I'm like, okay, that checks out. I'm like, I don't know about anything else there. The Sixers. He's also a minority owner in Joe Gibbs Racing. A little fun fact there as we've learned things fun. About. Yeah. So obviously you mentioned head coach, general manager, figuring that out. I think experience is a good thing. That'll be interesting to see what candidates, right? I think some of that could involve maybe some coaches that are let go this cycle. But they'll have some options, and they need somebody to kind of lay up. Yeah, they got to lay a foundation. If they can do it, right, you would feel like it. If there's that natural opportunity that, Tomlin and Pittsburgh want to part, it'd be interesting. Do you want to trade for a coach? That's kind of
probably not where your pick's going to end up, because if you're trading for a coach, you're trading a premium pick, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a first rounder, and right now that's what, the number 4 pick in the draft right now. So, you got to nail that. You got to nail that. But dude, this team is loaded. The most cap space in the NFL, $89 million in available cap space. And when you look at their notable expiring contracts, you may have some that you want to bring to the table, but I think there's 3 that are of consequence. Kamren Curl, 24-year-old safety, maybe Kendall Fuller, 28-year-old corner, and then maybe Curtis Samuel at 27 years old. Like, I look at their expiring contracts, and there's nothing that I'm like, man, I'm sweating bullets here. Keeping in mind, you got the most cap space in the NFL right now entering the offseason.
I'm also pulling some levers. They've got 3 big-time players that are still in their late 20s that are going to continue to be here. That being Tery McLaurin, Daron Payne, and Jonathan Allen.
Yep.
I'm basic restructuring all 3 of those contracts. I save 9.5 for Allen. I save 11 for Daron Payne, and I save 10.2 for Tery McLaurin. And you could say, well, why would they do that? They don't need the cap space, right? But this new theory that you're seeing progressive front offices execute is the more dollars that you spend now, but pay later because of the growth of the salary cap, you're actually spending 80 cents on the dollar as compared to spending a full dollar. Because when you pay the bill when the dollar is elevated in value. So I would want to do all of this. And then that way, guys you want to bring back, you're more than welcome to bring them back. You understand, as a year 1 organization, you hope you can get a head coach that can galvanize and get interest across the league, because if you do that, you can attract free agents. But if you can't, then you're probably going to have to front load some big money free agent contracts if you want to attract the players to come into this organization, starting from square one and build it up. So having maximum capital to be able to do that is valuable. Now, you could also cut Logan Thomas and save $6.5 million, which I would do without losing a wink of sleep from a team building perspective. Those 4 moves, Joe, get you $126 million in cap space. And if you don't use the cap space, guess what? You roll it over and you can apply it to next year when there's more cap space available, and it sticks in one hand, half dozen in the other, but the dollar's worth more.
Yep.
So I'm pulling all the levers anyway.
Whatever talent you want to acquire this offseason, you are not limited by cap space at all. I had all that down to McLaurin, Payne, Allen, cutting Logan Thomas. That feels like very obvious decisions. I always like to look at getting ahead of contract extensions. The one player that I thought was interesting there is Sam Cosmi. Transitioned to guard, had a great season. If you feel like he's going to be an answer for you, and I don't really look across this offensive line and see long-term pillars, you might want to wrap that one up if you can. Because you got an aging left tackle in Leno. I don't think your left guards. I don't think you have a starting left guard. I don't love Nick Gates at center. Right tackle is Andrew Wiley, who's he's fine. But Cosmi's your young piece here that you drafted, you've developed. He's turned into a good guard. I would think about getting him secured for the long term.
Well, there's fine print here. You're probably gonna have a new offensive system because we're probably not hiring Eric Bieniemy, right?
I wouldn't, no.
So, and you're probably not retaining him to be the OC with a new coach coming in. It's just unlikely that that's the case. So now that gets into a whole different set of conversations about paying Sam Cosmi before you see him in a new system. It puts you in an awkward spot with the Andrew Wiley contract because he was brought in large part because he played with Bieniemy in that offense in Kansas City, and he's been okay. He was bad to start. I think he stabilized himself a little bit down the stretch. Yeah, but he's been okay. Now you got to reevaluate Sam Howell. So I think this is the tumultuous part of where Washington is. All of these things about blank slate and starting new and new decisions and all that, it's outstanding. But you put yourself in a position where you have to hit yourself to the right pieces, the right remaining pieces from what you have. And from Washington's perspective, picking top 5, they'll have a decision to make as far as what to do with that pick. Do you trade out of that pick? Do you have another evaluation year, really? And if you don't, or if you do, then how do you thread the needle with all this? Because there's so many moving parts at key positions. And Cosmi, if you want to get ahead of the contract, great. But I would rather, as an interior offensive lineman, I'd rather see him play in whatever system we're going to implement before I were to make a financial commitment to him.
Right. He's the one guy that has one more year left on his deal that I thought, you know what, that's an interesting name to invoke as a potential early extension candidate. I think another big decision they have to make is quarterback, right? Did they see enough from Sam Howell this year that says, let's give him another season? Are you going to be aggressive? You're going to be, maybe you're picking 4 or 5. That's probably on the outside looking in at quarterbacks. But do you love one of these guys enough that you would potentially make a move up? I know that there's people that think Jaden Daniels is worthy of, being QB3 in a high selection. Is that a route that you want to go? On top of GM and head coach, this is as big of a decision that they have to make. I don't think Sam Howell is going to bottom out and be this can't function quarterback, but does he have the ceiling that you're looking for to be your guy? And from what I can gather, I'm not sure that most Washington people think that, but we'll see.
We have heard nothing but positive reviews as recently as the middle of November as far as Sam Howell and what he's shown. But it is worth acknowledging too, though, Joe, his last 4 games before whatever happens against the Jets defense on Sunday, because we're recording this on Friday afternoon, he's been bad the last 4 weeks. Going against Dallas, going against Miami, 11 of 26 against the Rams for 102 yards, not even 120, through 3 picks, and the Giants lost the week before that. The last 4 games, the adjusted net yards per attempt is 2.5, 2.3, 4.6, and 2.3.
Can't do that.
It's a horrendous stretch, and he has 2 touchdown passes in that stretch, and he has 6 interceptions in that stretch.
Not seeing the in-season growth.
There's likable things with Sam Howell, and there's always been likable things with Sam Howell, but we've talked on this show for years about don't let good prevent you from acquiring great. If you get the right opportunity, there is nothing about Sam Howell that would prevent me from pursuing another quarterback.
100%. The other decision, 5th-year option on Jamin Davis, $13.3 million is what that's going to cost for 2025. Jamin's gotten better every year, but I'm not making that commitment to him.
Neither would I. Again, it seems to be the popular theme on our show as far as 5th-year options when we do these is don't exercise the 5th-year option. If it goes well, you can get a player extension done anyway. Do the Garrett Bowles track.
Right. And if it really gets dicey, you can tag them.
Right. Right.
Right. Don't lock yourself in unless you just, I mean, some of it's a no-brainer. We'll get to some no-brainers, but.
And the tag is an extra few $1,000,000 for a team with $100 and something million in cap space that they could acquire in the blink of an eye if they wanted to. Yeah, we're all right.
We'll be okay. All right, we're going to be optimistic the rest of the way. We're going to talk to you about why Commanders fans should have hope for the future. That's coming up here in just a second, so be sure to stick with us.
It's time for the Levy Grill. Fight on,
my men. I am hurt, but I'm not slain.
For I am not slain. I'll lay me down,
and
bleed a while.
And then I'll rise,
fight again.
Marv Levy. Time to rally the troops. Marv Levy, yeah. Marv Levy lost the Super Bowl to the Washington franchise. So
they're 2 to Dallas, right?
2 to Dallas, 1 to the Giants, one to the Commanders, and then
you're gonna hate the whole NFC East, dude.
You know, the whole thing, yeah. The whole thing.
Yeah. Was that
have another shot maybe some point.
It's Dallas. Who's that guy?
Gary. It's Mark Miller's Gary.
Well,
yeah. That guy turned out to be a real jerk. He kind of resurfaced a couple years ago.
Yeah, I remember that because that viral news video where he's talking trash about Buffalo. It's Buffalo's time. And then they put him up on like the fan board or something at the games, and he turned out to be like a real stiff. So but that clip from the 90s will be the gift that keeps on giving this holiday season.
Poor Gary. All right, well, why should you be optimistic? Daniel Snyder's not your owner anymore.
When you put it like that. And I'll say this. I once upon a time, I was with a few friends from high school, a Philadelphia 76ers season ticket holder. So I've seen like Harris ownership in action. They do a nice job. So I think you're in really good hands from an ownership perspective to have somebody who, again, and I alluded to this earlier, understands the dynamics of owning a successful franchise. Now, there's a lot of change that's going to have to happen, from the stadium and the facilities to football operations and everything in between. But I think you guys, Washington fans, I think you have a good person at the top to perpetuate those changes for good.
My father-in-law is a Washington fan, was a season ticket holder for a long time, like back into the 80s. And the Snyder ownership, like, it snatched his soul. Like, the last few years, he's completely checked out. And so it's cool. It's cool to see that Snyder's not the owner anymore. We talked about the resources that you have in terms of cap space, the most in the NFL, and you can get even more. How about these draft picks, Kyle? They've got picks in the first round, 2 in the second, 2/3, a 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. Right now, those picks are 4, 36, 41, 68, 100, and 104. You're going to have 3 in the top 50. You're going to have 5 in the top 104. You're going to have a nice chance to add some meaningful talent to a roster that, as we discussed, needs some foundational pieces to add to it. So I think just their flexibility that they have with their resources, draft-wise, cap space-wise, that's going to put them in a really nice spot to turn the corner.
So let me ask you this. We saw this team trade at the deadline. And they traded Chase Young and they traded Montez Sweat. Could you foresee this team acquiring even more assets and further trading talent away as a part of their fresh start, but also like kind of getting ahead of, if we're going to build from square one, hypothetically, and they may not feel that they need to do that, but I think that's the pathway that I would be keen to approach with the top 5 pick in this year's class. Getting big contracts off the books and maximizing the return on those players, if you can do it, is another avenue where they may, have even more assets at their disposal when it's all said and done.
You thinking of John Allen?
That's one at the top of my list.
Yeah.
He seems tired of losing in Washington. And I think
player,
they're on the
man.
right track with the changes that they made, but I also don't think it's going to get better overnight there either.
Yeah.
It's going to be a process.
Tery McLaurin. Wide receivers get traded all the time. I would kind of want to have Tery McLaurin for my next quarterback, but if you really wanted to tear it down and build it up and get cheaper and all the picks and all that stuff, I mean, that's a way to do it. I don't know if trading away Tery McLaurin and John Allen's given the Commanders fans the optimism that we were selling here, but if you're really trying to play the long play here, that's the stuff you got to consider.
I don't think with Terry's contract, there's $29 million in dead cap on that contract. So I think that's a restructure. I think you keep him here. John Allen's got $12 million in dead cap. And his cap hits 21. So you could trade him and still save $9 million if you trade him before June 1st. So that's one for me as a John Allen's 29 years old. He'll be 29 at the end of the season. He's got 2 years remaining on his deal, and he's owed $32.5 million in cash. For a team acquiring, that might be a pretty attractive contract.
Yep.
As far as there'd be no guarantees in that contract either.
Yep.
So that's a player in a defensive line crop or class that has some likable talent, but I don't think it's particularly high at the top of the class. Allen would be the one that I would kind of question. What could we get for John Allen hypothetically? And does it make sense to make a move? We still have Daron Payne. We spent a second-round pick on Phidarian Mathis. And that pick presumably made with the intent of transitioning away from some of their more expensive talent down the road anyway with the old regime. Mm-hmm. This is an interesting conversation. I don't think it's a shoe-in, but it's another variable to if you're looking at them through the lens of maximizing your assets to build. I think that's one that they could explore if they wanted to.
I think they have just the last thing I wanted to bring up here was just there is some talent on this roster that's likable. I think offensively, Tery McLaurin, Brian Robinson as a nice running back. I've been impressed with him. I wish he had more opportunities, even catching the ball this year. Jahan Dotson, no, he didn't have the second season I think we wanted him to, but he's a talented guy that I think can be a big-time weapon for him. We've talked a lot about Sam Cosmi. Defensively, you still do have that defensive tackle duo of John Allen and Daron Payne. I think you find 25-plus teams in the NFL that would probably trade their defensive tackles for those defensive tackles. Cam Curl's a nice young safety. Jamin Davis has shown growth across 3 seasons. Ben St. Juste is a decent, secondary player. They played him a ton in the slot, which is really interesting to me. And then you do have those draft picks, Emmanuel Forbes and Quan Martin, who didn't help you much this year, but they're talented young players that ideally can give you something. So there's pieces here that you look at and say, all right, this can be part of what gets us out of this. And it's not, we're going to talk about less talented situations. We probably already have talked about less talented situations.
Well, and I would include Stromberg in that conversation as well as kind of like a power center who, was a top 3-round pick. The last thing that I had, Joe, was usually you get a team like this, and if they're gonna kick it back and start from square one, the dead cap situation can get really ugly. Which team did we just do that had like 30% of the salary cap space was eaten by dead cap?
Cardinals.
Was it Arizona, right?
Yeah.
Washington right now has less than 3% of their 2024 cap space eaten up by dead cap. And even if you were to hypothetically move on from John Allen and add $12 million to that, it's still less than $20 million for what's projected to be over $240 million, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's if you traded John Allen, it's still about 7.5%, 8%, versus Arizona's 3-4 times that figure as far as dead cap that they can't spend on players. So I think from Washington's perspective, say what you will, they at least have the foundation here of we're going to spend on talent that's on the roster. We're not going to be restricted by players that are no longer here. Now, that may accelerate a little bit if you do pursue assets, but you're then replacing those players with rookie contracts and saving money in the process anyway.
Daniel Snyder is not your owner.
Daniel Snyder's not your owner. That's going to do it for us here on Locked On NFL Scouting. I'm Kyle Crabbs. He is Joe Marino. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. We appreciate you all for checking out the show. Merry Christmas to all. We appreciate you guys for watching on the holiday. We hope you enjoyed. And again, Washington Commanders fans, that's why you have plenty to look forward to from here on out. We're out of here. Peace.